What's up guys? Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be going over Betaflight. So I'm going to just call this Betaflight for Noobs, and we are going to start with flashing a brand new Betaflight F3 board. Then we're going to move on over to the configurations and receiver, and I'm just going to walk you guys step by step on how to set up Betaflight to get it working and get everything working like it should. Then after that, if you would like, you can go and check out some of my other videos on Betaflight that I have, like my dynamic filters video. That'd be a good one I'd recommend going and checking out to get a better feel with Betaflight and get the quad flying much better. And soon here I plan on doing a PID tuning tutorial for Betaflight as well. But for today, what we're going to do is just simply go over Betaflight. We're going to get everything set up. I'm going to walk you guys through how to get a brand new board completely set up, regardless of what controller you're using or anything like that. So I'm going to go through all the steps, and by the time you're done with this video, you should be able to have your quad armed and in the air. It might not be flying the best because we haven't tuned it yet, but with the way Betaflight has been recently, it should be flying pretty damn good. So we're going to go over all the steps to do this, and we're just going to hop on over to Betaflight right now. Alright guys, so now that we are in the Betaflight configurator, and you can see I'm using 3.21, the first thing we're going to do with this board is we're going to flash it. So let's hop over to the firmware flasher screen. And I highly recommend always checking the full chip erase, especially if you are jumping up to a new version of Betaflight from an old version. I also recommend flashing every board you get. Sometimes they're already flashed and may even be set up close to what you need, but if you're wanting to get it set up exactly how you need it, the best thing you can do is just flash it and then start from scratch. So right now you could go ahead and choose your board, and I'm using the Betaflight F3 board, so that's what we're going to choose. And you'll notice that the newest version is 3.17 and it shows stable. Now we're wanting to put 3.2 on here, so you're going to click show unstable releases, and you'll now see that 3.2 RC4 has been added, which is a release candidate. So that is one we're going to use for this board, and then the next step you're going to do is go ahead and plug your board in. Alright, so now that the board is plugged in, you'll see that it popped up here. You have the right firmware select, or the right board selected, the right firmware selected, full chip erase, and obviously we're using an unstable release, so that needs to be checked. So now what you're going to do is load the firmware from online. And now it is loaded up, and it'll tell you everything about the firmware. And next thing we can do is hit flash firmware. So as you see, it said failed to open up serial port. We're going to unplug. We're going to plug it back in again. Same thing, COM 8. We'll hit flash firmware, and it just keeps disconnecting, and it's not doing what we need it to do. So the reason for this is we need to put this board in DFU mode, and there's two ways to do that. You can either jumper the board, or what you can do is connect to the board. You can go to CLI and you can type in DFU and then hit enter. Now, if you're already on 3.2 or newer, you're going to type in BL for bootloader and hit enter. But this is an older board, so we'll type in DFU, we'll hit enter, and it'll put it into bootloader mode. Now, as you can see, it still hasn't put it into DFU mode, and there's a reason for that. For some reason, the drivers for the DFU mode are not properly installed, or maybe you have a KISS set up and it's got the drivers for KISS installed, which are for some reason different than most of the Betaflight boards, so therefore you will not get DFU up here in the corner. It will not go into bootloader mode, and you will not be able to flash. So there's an easy trick to that, and that trick is to use the Impulse RC driver fixer. So we're going to go ahead and click yes, and you'll see it pop up here, and it's seen the board, and it's now installing the DFU driver. So this Impulse RC driver fixer is great. I use it all the time. I fly both KISS and Betaflight, and this thing has come in extremely handy. So now that we've done that, we should be able to unplug our board, plug it back in again. You'll see COM 8 pop up. You can then connect. We'll put it in DFU mode. And now you can see DFU is enabled. So now we can go back to the firmware flasher screen. We can, our firmware still loaded up from before. Oh wait, no it's not. So we need to click on the firmware, load the firmware up. Now it's loaded, and now we can click flash firmware, and you can see it's now erasing the board, and then it will flash it. So that is the easiest way I have found to flash Betaflight. And I've had issues with the DFU drivers many times. That BoltRC driver fixer is the greatest thing ever made, so I highly recommend getting that. It makes fixing your drivers very, very easy. I don't know if it works for all drivers or if it just works for the bootloader drivers. That's the main thing I use it for, those the bootloader drivers, and it works great. I'll put a link down in the description for the BoltRC driver fixer. That way you guys can pick that up as well. So, all right, so now that we have it flashed, the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and connect. And the first thing I do is go into the ports screen. So the reason I do this is depending on what version or what board you're using, and depending on what instructions you followed or how you set it up, everything you've connected, whether it be telemetry, it be smart audio for your VTX, or just the receiver itself. If you're running SBUS, the first thing you're going to need to do is go into this screen before we can move on to the next step. So what we need to do first here is find out what UART you soldered your receiver to, or the SBUS connection. It does not matter if you solder to UART 1, 2, or 3. All that matters is you know which one you soldered it to, and obviously it needs to be soldered to the RX of the receiver. So what you need to make sure you do is check the serial RX for the UART you have soldered your receiver to. So if you soldered your receiver to UART 2, which is what most instructions show for the Betaflight F3 board, then you're going to check serial RX for UART 2. If you are using some type of telemetry, you're going to want to check which telemetry, which UART you connected your telemetry to. The instructions for Betaflight usually shows UART 1, so you will go and select your telemetry for UART 1. And then if you're using smart port audio, which the Betaflight F3 board shows on UART 3 in most of its diagrams, then that's the same thing. You're going to go over to the peripherals. You are going to select the TBS smart audio. If you're using the tramp, you would select tramp, etc. So, and same with telemetry. Whatever type of telemetry you're using, that's what you're going to want to select, but you're going to want to select that on the proper UART. So once you've done that, you can go ahead and click save and reboot, and it should automatically connect back up. Okay, so the next thing you're going to want to do after you've set up the proper UART for the serial RX is you're going to want to move over to configurations. Now in the configurations tab, the first thing you're going to want to do is select the receiver. If you are not using the SBUS or some type of serial RX, let's say you're using PWM or PPM, you will not need to go through the ports tab. You can go straight to this receiver settings inside of the configuration. But most of you guys are going to probably be using SBUS or some form of serial, so you're going to want to select serial based receiver, and you're going to want to select SBUS if you're using a Taranis or Futaba. I know some of the FrSky uses iBus, and Turnkey uses iBus. You've got the Crossfire protocol for the Crossfire setups, and then for Spectrum you'll have Spectrum 1024 and 1048. So you're going to want to select whatever one is the proper one for your setup. So for this setup we're using SBUS, so I'm going to be selecting that. And now what you can do is move on to the rest of the settings. So you can go ahead and hit save and reboot, or I normally just go through and set up the rest of what I'm going to do. And this is how I usually set up almost all of my quads. So I'm running D-Shot, so I'm going to go ahead and select D-Shot 1200. The next thing I usually do is drop this down to 4K, 2K. It makes tuning a little bit easier. If you are really new to tuning, and you're wanting to actually dive into PID tuning, I would recommend setting this down at 1K. That way you can hear the oscillations as you turn your PIDs up and down. You'll be able to hear those oscillations very easily. On these faster loop times, it makes it much harder to hear them. But the way Betaflight has been recently, I recommend doing 4K, 2K, and things should feel pretty good right out of the box. So the next thing you're going to want to do is, if you did any board, if you set your board at like 180 degrees out or 90 degrees out, make sure you, or even set it upside down, you're going to want to make sure you align the board. So you're going to want to make sure you set these to what you set your board. If the arrow on your board is pointing forward, then you can ignore that and not have to set any of those up. You can go ahead and put a craft name in if you want. And other than that, I recommend turning at least anti-gravity on and air mode on. By default, they have improved the way air mode works, so you don't get as much as the bounciness anymore on landing. And the anti-gravity just helps with tuning a lot. So go ahead and turn those two things on right now. And then other than that, that is all we're going to do right now in the configurations tab. So this is everything you'll really need to do. Obviously for ESC/motor features, select what you know you can use. So if you're not sure if you can use 1200 or 600 or D-Shot at all, make sure you select one shot 125. Almost all ESCs can do one shot 125. If you know they can do one of these other settings, then go ahead and select it. Obviously D-Shot is a little bit better than one shot, and there's many reasons why, but I'm not going to go into all that. You're always best to select what you know will work versus trying to select something and then have problems later. So first thing you want to do with any new quad is just get it working. So select what you know will work. On this setup, I'm running BL Heli 32 ESC, so I know D-Shot 1200 will work. So now that we have everything in here set up the way we need it, you're going to want to hit save and reboot. And it should automatically connect, which it did. And the next thing you're going to want to do is just go over to the receiver tab. Now, I do not have a radio connected to this flight controller yet. It's not even put in a quad, so I can't show you all of this, but at this point you should have these at least pitch, roll, yaw, and throttle working between your radio and your receiver. If not, make sure you check that you are bound to your receiver, and if you know for a fact you are bound to your receiver, make sure you connected to the right port, the right UART, and make sure you have the right configuration. If you know you have the right configuration, you know you're on the right UART, and you know you're bound, there should be no reason why these are not moving up and down. If they are moving up and down, go ahead and select the right channel mapping for your quad so that roll works on the roll, pitch works on pitch, yaw on yaw, and throttle on throttle. The next thing you're going to want to do is check what your max and your minimum commands are for all of your sticks. So the easy way to do that is just put all the sticks to the top right corner, and everything should go to their full as high as they can go, and then put all the sticks to the bottom left hand corner, and everything should go down to the minimum. There's two things you can do at this point. You can either go into your radio and set your radio up to go to 2000 on the high side and 1000 on the low side for all of your settings, or you can look at what the high side is, look at what the low side is, and you can make the stick min. So we'll just start with stick min. Let's say that the numbers here drop down to 1000. If they go down to 1000, then go ahead and make stick minimum 1010. And then go all the way to the high side. If you're getting 2000 on the high side, you're gonna wanna make this 1990. So what we've done here is we've made it to where the command is going 10 higher in each direction. So 10 lower on the low side and 10 higher on the high side, so that we're guaranteed to get all of our stick movement. We'll get the most resolution this way, but we're guaranteed to be able to arm the quad, and we will always be getting full stick. So you won't, if you have these higher than what you're actually moving your sticks, you will never get your full PIDs, or your full rates, I should say. Also, if the stick min is lower in here than what the stick actually goes to, you may have issues with arming and the quad won't arm. So let's say your high side only goes to 1090, you would want to set this up as 1080. Or sorry, if your sticks go to 1990 on the high side, then you're going to want to set this up as 1980. If you only have 1850, for instance, then you would want to set this up as 1840. So you can see what I'm doing here. I'm making sure that stick max is at least 10 lower than what the actual stick goes to. This will get you the most resolution, and it's much easier doing it this way than it is to go into the radio and set every single one of these up to match. Now, if they're way off, like one's way off from the other, then you're going to want to go in to your radio and actually set up your endpoints. But for what I use, which is the Taranis, I normally just set these up at 1000 and 2000 because the defaults on the radio go below 1000 and they go above 2000 by default. So if you're using a Taranis, you can usually get away with just going 1000, 2000. So I'm going to go ahead and set these up for the particular radio that I know this is going to be used with. And for stick center 1500, you're going to want to make sure you set your sub trims to 1500 so that all of your sticks while resting rest at 1500 on here. You can do it for throttle as well, but it's sometimes difficult to get your throttle perfectly centered on the radio and then set up the center point, and it'll affect your endpoints. So for throttle, I usually just leave it alone and set everything up for over here for the min and max, and the little bit throttle may be off on center isn't a big deal because of how much you're moving it. So the next thing we're going to do is set up our RC deadband. Now I usually just set this up as 2 and 2. And I do that simply because even with a good radio, for instance, I'm running the Taranis Special Edition. It has the Hall effect sensors, and it will still get a little bit of glitching around center. And that's just simply because the sensors are extremely sensitive and they may not just perfectly rest at 1500. So the trick to this is you just add a little bit of deadband. It's such a small amount that you really won't feel it, and it just overall make things a lot easier in the long run. So the this down here may be rotating if you're at say like 1501 or 1502, and turning this up will not stop it here. So if you're wanting to make sure this is set up properly, the way you're going to do this is look up here, and if it's going to like 1502, then set this at about 150 or set the RC deadband at 3. This means it has to go up 3 points in order to actually send a command. So if these are properly set, or at least you feel like they're set properly, you can go ahead and hit save, and there's a way to check and see if they're actually set properly. And that's where we're going to go over to the PID tuning tab. So this is where you'll set your rates up, and you'll notice that this animation down here will show you what your rates will look like. So what the flight controller, or what the remote is sending to the flight controller, and then the flight controller is actually trying to do, will happen here. This is obviously before any outside forces take place, and it's just directly the PIDs telling this what to do. So this is always going to look more sensitive than what your quad's going to feel like in the air. But what we're mainly looking at right now is that this is not moving. If this isn't moving at all, that means your deadband is properly set up, and the quad is not going to be commanded to roll in any direction once you go out to fly. And that's what we want. We want this to be sitting here and resting perfectly still while the radio is connected, and you should be able to move your sticks around and move this around and then let go, and it should stay exactly where you set it. If it does not stay exactly where you set it, then go back to the receiver tab and make sure that these haven't moved away from 1500 too much. If they have, it's a good indication that your gimbals are wearing out and you're going to need to up the deadband even more. So just keep going up with the deadband until you get it to a point where in the PID tuning tab, this does not move at all. So once you have that set up, the next thing I do is go over into the modes tab. So I highly recommend always setting your quad up to arm on a switch. That way, in the case of an accident, like you're flying towards the pilot's area, and you lose control, you can instantly flick the disarm switch and it will shut it off. The way this works is you set the channel you want it to work off of, and then you set the bar where you want it to arm. So to do this, in the receiver tab on your aux 1 is actually channel 5 in most radios. So you're going to want to set up channel 5 on your radio to a switch, and then that switch will command aux 1 up and down. Once you have that working, you'll go back to the modes tab, you'll add the range, you will select aux 1, you will move the switch to the position you want it to arm, and then you will go ahead and move this to wherever the little yellow bar here is for arm. And if you want, you can even close this up a little bit. So let's say we wanted it to arm right here where this yellow is. That's what we would do. We would set the yellow bar over top of the little yellow bar here, and then you would go ahead and click save. And once you do that, you would have this little motor arming switch. This will turn on and off when you arm. So as long as this sits over this, that should turn yellow. Make sure your props are off. Make sure your battery is not plugged in when doing this, or you're gonna have a bad day. So everything you're doing right now, you should not have props on for or a battery plugged in. But anyways, so now that you have this arming, when you turn the switch on, this turns yellow. Now we have the quad ready to arm, and we are basically done at this point. If you are using like a Betaflight F3 board or a board with built-in OSD, you can go into here and set your OSD up. But at this point, you should have everything done to where you can go out and arm the quad and get it in the air and start flying it. If everything worked out great, then the next thing you can go ahead and do is come into the PID tuning tab, and you can start setting up your rates the way you want them. If you already know what rates you're comfortable with, then obviously you could go in here and set these up before going out and testing. But at this point, everything that you need to do to get the quad flashed and set up to get it up in the air is done, and you can be in the air flying at this point in time. Everything else from this point is technically just tuning. Some of it may be rate tuning, some of it may be PID tuning, and then like I said, check out my dynamic filter video, and I go over in that video how to set up the dynamic filter, which will get you a much better feeling setup without having to dive too much into PID tuning at all. So it's a really good video, so make sure you check that out. Yeah, so I mean, other than a little bit of tuning, you should have a pretty well set up and flyable quad at this point in time. Don't be afraid to go into the rates. If you're completely new to this, don't be afraid to go into these rates and mess with them a little bit. The expo, if it feels too sensitive, you can go ahead and turn expo up. That'll make it less sensitive, but it'll make it toward the end roll speed is the same. So this here will show you the curve, and it'll even tell you the number that you're currently at right here. So don't be afraid to mess with these. These have a lot more to deal with how your quad feels currently with the way Betaflight is nowadays. Your rates have a lot more to do with how your quad actually feels than a lot of the tuning. If you're new to the hobby and you're completely lost, start messing with your rates and getting it to feel how you want. A few pointers I'll give you is super rate will curve. It'll move the top end up a little bit. I recommend turning the super rate up. And one of the other things I recommend is once you get yaw much higher than about 800, there's not enough command in the quad to actually rotate it that fast. So what you want to do for that, this is all a little bit of a bonus here, but you'll see that now that I turned, let's see, we'll turn this up to like 1200. 1200 is pretty fast. It's what a lot of guys run for freestyle, is like 1200 or faster. So we'll use that. Now you can see that our pitch and roll, it has now moved way up here, and it's separated itself from yaw. So one of the tricks I like to do is I will turn my yaw up till I get it to be around 800. and I'm trying to flatten yaw out as much as possible, and you'll see why in a minute. So super rate, the lower you go, the flatter this will get. The higher you go, the more curved it will get. It's basically kind of adding an expo effect. So we'll get this up around 800. And what you see now is I've made it to where yaw stays really close with pitch and roll until we get out towards this area. And the reason I did that is there's no point in making your yaw go up with pitch and roll, because after about 800, all you're going to do is get a ton of yaw jump, and it's not going to actually yaw as fast as it's being told to. So it's kind of pointless. But what we've done is we made it to where it matches pitch and roll as much as possible, and this will make it to where when you're flying, your stick commands will stay the same. So when you roll to the left and yaw to the left, you'll make a nice curve, a nice arced curve, and they won't feel disconnected from one another. Some people like to have their quad set up differently. I just know from experience that I've had a lot of people run my rates and really like the feel of them. And this is the way I do it to get as much pitch and roll command as I can get without having too much on yaw that starts to cause a problem. So anyways, this is just a little bonus. At this point, you should be able to go out and fly and have a good time, and I hope you guys like this video. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit the like button. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask them down in the comments, and if there's anything else you guys would like to see in the future as far as how-to videos go, make sure to comment down below. I read all the comments, and I like to see your guys' feedback. So hopefully this video helped you guys out, and have fun flying.